Don't forget, you can reach the latest episode of Potomac Watch anytime. Just ask your smart speaker, play the Opinion Potomac Watch podcast.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome back to Potomac Watch. I'm Kate Batchelder Odell, here with my esteemed colleagues, Kimberly Strassel and Colin Levy. We'll turn now to the president's latest physical exam. So a 5-page letter released by the White House calls President Biden a healthy, vigorous 80-year-old male who is fit to successfully execute duties of the presidency. This document runs through some minor maladies, an asymptomatic AFib in his heart, seasonal allergies. We can all have solidarity there. Stiff gait from wear and tear. A lesion sent out for biopsy as the president spent a good deal of time in the sun in his youth, the letter says. So let's dig into the details on this a little bit. But Kim, I want to tie this back to our earlier conversation a little bit, because the president's speech on mystery objects, Biden talked for less than 10 minutes and then he shuffled off stage without taking any questions from the press. It really wasn't a reassuring performance at a tense moment when the public is wondering why U.S. fighter jets are shooting stuff down over U.S. territory. So I guess my overall question to you is, should we be satisfied with these physicians' notes, or do you think Americans are right to wonder if an 80-year-old is really well suited to just the intense dynamic demands of being the U.S. president?
Let me say to begin with that I certainly hope that the physicians' notes are accurate and true. We would all like to have a physically healthy president, not just because it's good for the nation, but also because we wish everybody well in their health. So I hope that would be the case. But I think that this is a real problem because we have long had White House physicians. We've long had these kind of routine medical checks that presidents go to do. And I think up until pretty recently, people had a lot of faith in that process, or at least marginal amount of faith in that process. But, when you have a doctor's note that comes back and tells you that the 80-year-old is healthy and vigorous and basically made it sound as though he could go run a marathon tomorrow and he'd be good, it does make you sort of wonder, what doctors are doing this, and is there a purpose, a political purpose beyond an honest kind of medical evaluation? But the bigger problem is that, hopefully the president is physically healthy, but that is not what most people are concerned about. They're concerned about his mental acuity at this point. And it was very noticeable to me that while he went and did this clearly with the purpose, by the way, of reassuring the nation as he prepares to get ready to maybe launch another presidential run, that the White House studiously ignored some of the calls that have been made in recent years that there ought to be some kind of mental acuity evaluation. You'd have thought that they would want to do that. They would be eager to do that if, in fact, the president is in as fitting and fighting mental form as the White House continues to say. And yet they didn't. That's not what came out. And we are seeing these moments more, the president not taking comments, the president doing fewer public relations events or ones in which he interacts with anybody, very stage managed in how he is rolled out these days. And that only undermines confidence in where he is too. And it's quite remarkable to me that he is nonetheless, given all of this, gearing up to run for president again and is actually debating still functioning in office when he'd be 86 years old at the end of his next term.
Yeah, Kim, and it's a great point. When you compare it to Ronald Reagan, age was a huge theme in his reelection, and he was 72.
72, yeah.
So now he looked like a spring chicken comparatively. But Nikki Haley this week, in announcing her candidacy for president, suggested a, quote, mandatory mental competency test for all politicians above the age of 75. So I think there are obvious constitutional problems with this idea, but I do think it underscores that she thinks that Biden's capacities are a political weakness and that she can exploit in her campaign. Colin, I want to ask you, what do you think of that idea? So voters know that Biden will be 86 at the end of his second term, but should there be other types of information, more cognitive testing, more other ways that voters can evaluate whether he's up for the job?
Well, I think it's interesting. We know that there are tests out there that can be run that are very rigorous, neuropsych evaluations that can track exactly which parts of the brain are working and which parts aren't working quite as well. And one of the things that is important to know here, and I think certainly of worthy concern for voters, is this a linear decline? Is this something that could just sort of go off a cliff? When you look at the doctor's notes talking about his physical state, he says, well, he's been slowly getting a little bit stiffer in his gait. He shuffles a little bit more. This is the natural, steady progression of arthritis that is in his back and some problems with his feet. And And we know it's just going to keep sort of going exactly like this. No big deal. When you get into the realm of mental competence and all of that goes with it, it's not always as predictable. And I think that's what gives people a little bit of the willies here. Can you always know exactly what's been lost and when it's been lost? Is there a day when you just aren't at your best or functioning at full capacity right when difficult decisions need to be made? People that do go through mental declines, it's often very well known that there's times of day that they're very sharp and on their game, just as they always were, and other times of day when they're not, when they're a little bit foggier or more easily confused or more forgetful. By the way, voters watching this whole thing play out, many of them can identify with it very easily. And everyone has parents, everyone has grandparents, and people watch these things play out in their own family. They know how they work. And so as they watch everything on TV and watch President Biden speaking and watch the sort of sense that he's being protected now a bit by his staff, the same way that families will often gather around someone getting old and protect them a bit, I think it undermines confidence in his ability for leadership. And as we were talking about in the last segment, this is a time in American history when there are a lot of threats on the horizon. So it's not just a matter of getting through a speech about the balloons. It's a matter of what if something really significant happens? Who's around him? And so I think as much as we care about his competence, we should also be asking who's there with him. If we're going to reelect President Biden, assuming he runs again, who is going to be there with him when those decisions are coming through? We don't just have to go through a staff list. We know who all the secretaries are, but who's going to be there as his proxy?
Yeah, Colin, I think that's exactly right. I mean, you and I both have written quite a bit about tensions in Taiwan. And if there were another crisis in Taiwan or, say, a blockade or an attempted invasion by China, I mean, the president would be faced with some enormously difficult and dynamic decisions, not least whether the U.S. should get involved. And if the U.S. did get involved, I mean, think about the rapid life or death decisions he would have to make. So the stakes here really matter. But I really do want to ask Kim, how much of this is being driven by the lack of a Democratic replacement who could win an election? I mean, Kamala Harris, her original shot at the presidency flamed out pretty fast. Kim, are Democrats putting him up again because they can't come up with somebody better?
I think there's two things at fault here, and I just want to throw in the other one. I will get to that. But I think one of the faults here is actually the press corps, which is, other than running stories in which they report on whispers of some people who have some concerns about Biden running again, no one is directly confronting this in the press corps. And it's notable because you brought up Ronald Reagan and his reelection. And there was a very famous moment in the second debate between Mondale and Reagan. Mondale was really going after Reagan on his age. At one point, even accused him of leadership by amnesia. And so this had become a theme. And they got to that second debate. And one of the press members, who was one of the debate moderators, flat up asked the president, said, look, we know that we have had crises in the past and that presidents have had to stay up for days at a time. It's physically and mentally grueling to deal with this. Mr. Reagan, do you really think that you still have what it takes? And that, of course, was the opening for Reagan's famous line in which he not only assured everybody he was, but said that he wasn't going to make an issue out of his opponent's youth and inexperience, so that he wasn't going to make age an issue. But yes, I agree. Part of this, I think, is a party that is making a decision that they need to close their eyes and hold their hands, and that their best shot still remains an incumbent, even though that incumbent has obvious weaknesses. And let me be clear, the White House's actions here, whether it's going to get this physical, whether it's roaring out of the midterms and saying all things go and the president's in great shape politically and in every other way, they are trying to ward off a competitor, because I truly believe if there's one person who steps in there and challenges Biden, you're going to see the weakness of this president exposed, not just in terms of his ability to win a potential primary if he had a serious challenger, but the weaknesses as he heads into a general election. So they are desperate to hold that off. And so far, the party is going along. But I did see that Andrew Yang yesterday came out with a tweet saying that it would probably be good for President Biden to have to go into a primary and show everybody what he's made of.
Well, thanks, Kim and Colin. We'll let Kim have the last word, and we'll see you next time for Potomac Watch.